to Hey everybody, welcome back. I'm Susan Lindner, your host of the Innovation Storyteller Show. My voice is a little stuffy. I'm getting over 10 days of COVID, but I'm so excited to be back with you here today, especially because my guest is here to talk about, of all things, how we plant the idea of innovation and change in the mind of our most critical audiences. We're going to be calling it the Inception method, and I hope you'll tune in. This is well beyond anything Leonardo DiCaprio was thinking about when he was building his film. But I want to introduce you to my guest today. Throughout his career, Naftali Dratman as a has led innovation programs in Israel for large corporations such as GM, Airbus, and LG Electronics. Naftali started his career as an engineer in the United States Air Force, where he worked on innovative space programs. The Air Force is one of my favorite clients here at Innovation Storytellers. And his background includes just incredible product leadership roles in two different automotive startups, as well as a business role in one of Israel's leading universities. Naftali was a trailblazer in automotive tech in Israel before it became more widespread in the 2010s. And his foresight led to a new startup being created in the automotive night vision safety systems arena. So in addition to being a mechanical and aerospace engineer, he is a licensed FAA airframe and power plant mechanic. Naftali has been sought after to serve in so many different advisory roles for startups in the areas of aviation and automotive and space, where he helps companies from both a technical and a business go-to-market perspective. And now Naftali is working on a new initiative to help facilitate more obscure innovation between differing industries. And we're going to be talking a little bit about Naftali's background in open innovation as well, because his ultimate goal is to create more out-of-the-box thinking in terms of dual-use technologies beyond defense and civilian technologies to create a means for ecosystems like academia, startups, government, corporations to implement these brilliant ideas. So Naftali, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So Naftali, there are so many things we could talk about. Your background is so broad and so varied, but how did you decide to go from Air Force to stepping into the world of innovation? How did that come about for you?
Well, I actually had the idea. I was still working in aerospace at Israel Aerospace Industries. I just had the idea, why don't corporates come to Israel? There's plenty of tech. Why don't I try to find a position where I'm working for a corporate and connecting them to the tech in Israel? And that was the idea I had. I was in touch with some headhunters, and they said, this is what I'd like to do. If you find anything, send it my way. A couple weeks later, something came my way. They told me they couldn't tell me what it was. So
Oh,
I
my
went to
favorite kind of project, right? We have something for you, but we can't tell you what it is.
they sent me to a car dealership for the first interview. I kind of guessed it was in the area of automotive,
Good
and
thinking.
yeah, that's what it was. And I had several interviews, and the first time in my life through the interview process, I had to go through something that was extremely weird. They don't have these anymore. They used to have these psychotechnic exams as part of the interview process, where it's a day long test with quizzes and putting together puzzles, and then you're in a room with other people doing some mission. And at the end of the day, you have to get interviewed by a psychologist. And what I think got me into it in the end, as I understood, I was one of two candidates at the end. What I think got me into it was the question that the psychologist asked, and the question was, "How do you view your success in this position? How would you characterize your success?" And my answer was, and this is going back 25 years, so I recall saying something like, if I can take my crazy idea in my head that I think would be good for the company, and I
Mm.
can get somebody else in the company to do it and actually put money behind it, I would consider that my success criteria. And several months later, I got the position. Several months later, I asked, all right, I went through all this process. I asked my boss, we were traveling back from Detroit at the time. I said, all right, remember that psychotechnic exam? I didn't ask you in the first few months, but now that I'm on board and I'm comfortable in the position, how did I do? And he said, the testing agency said we should go with the other guy.
I love it.
What?
Love it.
So why did you take me? He said, because you were crazy enough to give that answer.
So, and you knew you found a good place to work, right? They were willing to
Right,
take a bet on crazy. So fantastic.
right.
um, so this idea of implanting in the mind of your audience the idea that it's their idea, not your idea to do the cool big thing, is what really intrigues me about your whole approach to innovation is get the other guy to think it's their idea, get the other guy to see the light, right? I know I was thinking about my mom. She would convince my dad that my dad hated chicken. Grew up with relatives that in Czechoslovakia back in the day who had a farm, and my dad once saw his aunt kill a chicken, just twist the neck and boom. And as a result, my dad could not look at chicken, couldn't think of chicken. He was a little boy, and just it broke his heart. And so we grew up in a German household, and there would be schnitzel on the table all the time. And my dad would say, "Is this chicken?" And my mom would say, "No, it's pork." And every single time, but it was chicken the whole time. And my dad, I think, went to his grave never knowing that he had a lifetime of eating chicken in our house.
But you know the saying, tastes like chicken.
Exactly. Now we know why. So my mom had this quiet little deception, right, that was going on in my dad's life. The regular coffee got replaced with decaf at some point in time. There were these mild deceptions that wound up making my dad healthier, certainly, certainly saved a lot of money in the household, etc. Right? There are all these different ways that we actually got to an endpoint, but maybe deception isn't the right word, but bringing people on board by allowing them to see the light in their terms rather than ours is one means of communicating ideas in a way that makes people come on board because it feels like it's uniquely their own, right? So
Correct.
tell us a little bit about how this process works. Can you give us some examples of how you were able to bring other corporate executives on board with the ideas that you were working on? I'm thinking specifically about an idea you shared with me around LG.
Yeah. So back in the time when I was in LG, it was, when I started with LG, in my open innovation career, things just got harder because working with LG, it was like working in, like you're in the movie 2001. You're trying to penetrate into the organization, and you're like the astronaut outside of the spaceship, and the computer is just not letting you in. So how do you get in? And how do you do something? And then should we run a startup challenge? Should we do some other ideas? And I said, no, I think I came to the conclusion after asking around that one-on-one and helping the people there empower themselves to do ideas is the best way to go forward. So the best story I can say about this is the automotive OEMs would put infotainment systems in the cars, and most of the time those systems were made by LG. It's the screen next to the driver where you can control the air conditioning and the radio and all the car systems that are on there. And the executive in charge of R&D for LG for the automotive activity said to me, I appointed somebody to take the infotainment system because it's kind of boring and we want to add new features and we want to be able to make money off of it. There's no money coming in from it right now except what the OEM purchases. There's no recurring fees with it. Can we turn it into something that's recurring? So I appointed him to do it. Why don't you speak with him? So I did, and he was kind of, antagonistic at the beginning. And fortunately, I had Korean employees in the office, and I asked them, all right, let's do it. Let's do things differently. Let's speak with him, make him our friend, take him out to lunch, understand what his life is about, understand what his challenges are in LG. Let's not even talk about tech. Let's have a couple meetings like that and see how it goes. So we
Right.
did.
So we're talking about culture, right? To get started, right? You're an
Right.
American slash Israeli who is coming into a Korean consumer electronics culture, right? Which is highly successful, but highly regimented, right? And has a very specific way of operating.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. They're like the Germans. You can compare them a lot to the Germans. Very procedural, working per specifications and all this. But this was actually an idea you could not latch onto. At least in this aspect, we knew that the person who was appointed had to do something. And my goal was that he would do my something.
So he had to take action. The question is, would he take the action you wanted him to do?
Right.
Yes. Okay. So how did
So
so you had these beautiful lunches, and I can't imagine what the conversation was, but it was about relationship building. Is that what you mean?
right.
Yeah.
It was talking about kimchi and it was talking about, life in Korea and other things. And, it started out in Korean and they kind of ignored me because I had one of my Korean employees in the office with me. And then eventually it turned over to speaking with me in English. I don't know how it happened, but it started happening. And then I spoke with the Korean employee and said, all right, now's the time to put the idea into his head and create a champion. Let's turn him into our champion.
Mm,
And we did it slowly. And the idea was being in Israel, the ecosystem's so small. We know a lot of startups, a lot of potential technology we can bring. So one of those was augmented reality. I knew of a startup that did something with Yelp where you could connect the phone and point it in the direction of a restaurant and get some digital information about the restaurant. I said, why not take that, put it into connect it with the video, the forward-looking camera, which LG also had in the cars, and the sensors. LG had all the infrastructure within the vehicle as part of the infotainment system to do this. And the money-making scheme was let's create something where um, McDonald's or retail shops or whatever department stores, they could revenue share with you, advertise on the platform. That's, put the two together. So that was the idea. And then his first reaction, "Well, it can never be done." You know, so why don't you give it a chance? Speak with the company. And he said, but they did the solution in a static way. They just did it on still photos. They didn't do it on video. Talk to them. So we initiated first contact with the startup. We brought another player into the picture, and we needed them because to go through all the technical, I don't have a better way of saying it, but all the technical hell that they put you through in order to understand the solution and feel comfortable with it, you have to go through it. So we brought them into the conversation, and they said, "Well, we've only done this on still photos." I said, "No, we have a first prototype that we did it with video, and it works." What about when it's bouncing around and you're in a car and it's turning corners and all
right.
that stuff? So we've never done that, but we can try. They were willing to try that. And he said, all right, can you send me the video? Send me the video how it turns out. They did. And he says, well, it needs further development. Well, obviously, you're talking about a startup solution. They're not going to give you something that's ready to go. That was his task. Once he took it on, he knew he was ready to to start integrating within his systems. Then that was the time for him to take it on and to start improving it and bring it to the right readiness level. But he was very insistent. Added more questions. There were so many questions I couldn't even remember them all. We brought the company to Korea to help his level of anxiety to make him feel better. We did something with the infotainment system in Korea, something quick and dirty in the process. And along the way, the same executive came and brought me back in and said, "Did you bring him any ideas?" And I said, "Yeah, this is the idea." And the executive said, "Great, I like this idea. Let me go to him and tell him I'm giving him the funding right now. Let's do it." And I said, "No,
Wow.
please don't do that." Because I want him to come to you. I don't want to ruin, I don't want you to ruin the process and feel like you're taking over and empowering the situation. I want him to step up to the task and I want him to become the champion. And it would be better that he comes on board and nobody disturbs him. And I think it will be a week or two before he's with us. All right. So the executive agreed because he was anxious to do something. Because he received it from his senior management that he needs to do something. So that's what happened. It took another week or two. Towards the end of the process, he threw another curveball into it, which was he understood everything, and he said, "I think I can do this myself now." So I had to come up very quickly and said, and so can the startup. They can do the same thing right now. They understood all your challenges, and then they can go to one of your competitors and do the same thing. Why would you want that to happen? They learn just as much from you as you learn from them. And that was enough for him. He realized that he wasn't going to be able to escape from it. And I said, all right, let's make it happen. So he started creating all the technical statement of work and all the KPIs he had to meet. And he worked that out with the startup. And he was fully on board after that point. And he even did the business case, people on board, and all the planning people he needed to bring on board. I was after that point, and I was able to do the inception of my idea, and took a while for him to take it on board as his own. I was just there as kind of as consultant, cheerleading along the way. Do you need me? I'm around. You know where to find me, and that kind of thing. He took it from there, and he ran with two programs. The first one was more of an initial proof of concept just to make sure it works in the vehicle the way it should. And then he worked on another program which dealt with the nicer UX, the nicer user interface, and it was a success case after that. I just had to remove some obstacles. I had to implant the idea, which took time. The vision was mine, and then it took off from when he was fully on board.
So you convinced Hal to open up the hatch door on the spaceship, right? To eventually let our astronaut back on board.
Hopefully, I didn't have to go on board like Dave Bowman did, where I just had to go into the airlock and endanger myself. But there were some challenges. They were kind of scary along the way. Yes.
Yeah, because you're leaving a lot to chance whether or not your implant is actually going to work on this occasion. But you really present this idea of understanding all the obstacles that really stand in our way as innovators, right? Trying to figure out how do we it's not just a matter of culture, right? It's not just a matter of technology. And when someone says to you, well, it looks like a great idea, just give it to us for free. Like after all that work, right? After getting to the end of that, I mean, how do you combat? We want it for free, like
It, you get what you pay for, which is nothing.
that's right.
That's
That's right.
that's the price of free.
Yeah. Um, and so, these are, I think all of my listeners can think about that. What's the tip to actually, frankly, letting go of some of the control, right? Because when you say, I'm gonna let this guy think it's his big idea, I'm gonna let this guy you're ceding a lot of power in the situation, right? In order to cross your fingers, they're actually gonna run with it.
Well, I was in the back of my mind. I think everybody knew who the idea came from. So I didn't have to. I didn't have to go with an ego trip into every single place in the company. Hey, I did this. That's not what I was looking for. I was looking for the idea to succeed. And a lot of times along the way, I got accused of, hey, do you work for LG? Do you work for the startup? No, no, I work for LG. I'm just trying to help both sides work out their differences. And being, it's like trying to avoid a divorce along the way.
Yeah. So what do you think some of the biggest mistakes are that big corporations get into when they're working with startups? We have this conversation a lot on this show, and there's lots of different theories about why this does or doesn't work because so often, there's someone who's really excited about a new technology, they want to bring it in, they want to implement it, but the battleship that is a large corporation can sometimes run over the speedboat that is a startup, right? I mean, there's a real danger in watching a lot of watching a lot of like destruction or inaction or you know it's like almost a merger and acquisition. So many M&A deals fail because the mothership can't incorporate the new acquired entity into the culture appropriately.
Right. Well, I have things that I don't like to do more than I can say what I do like to do is I like to work on the one-on-one. I like to have somebody I know who has to do something, and that for me is the best hunting grounds, so to speak.
Mhm.
That somebody has to do something, and then I want to have that somebody who has to do something do what I implant into his brain and then make it his own. What I don't like is, I see this a lot, and what I don't think is very successful are, what's called startup challenges. And let's try and open it up, and we have a challenge. Firstly, I don't think the companies know how to define a challenge. They don't even know what they want to do. The person in LG I spoke about, for example, he had no idea what he was going to do. All he knew was, I need to come up with something that my bosses are going to like, that makes money and solves new features, solves the problem of new features on the infotainment system. That's all he knew, right?
Yeah.
If you open it up to a challenge and you create something from that, they're not going to know how to do any more than two lines. New features on infotainment system and make money. That's all they know how to define. So if you open up to a challenge, you're going to get a lot of startups coming that's just, firstly, they're going to overwhelm the engineers. They're going to, you're not going to solve the core problem of the corporate knowing how to actually implement the idea. The only way to do it in my career, which worked, was one-on-one. Help him with ideas of your own. Bring them to him, but first get to know him first. They there's no replacement for that. That's the only way you can get in. That's the only way that the astronaut can penetrate into the ship.
Yeah.
And that's what worked for me. So I kind of cringe when I see these startup challenges because I don't think that's a very good way of pursuing any open innovation. I've had to do them for lack of let's say for Airbus, for lack of any other activity that I could actually start. That's the only activity I could start, was a startup challenge. So I had to run with it, but I wasn't so happy with it. Um, we we did something like that in my last company. They're more PR events than they are real nitty-gritty, getting into the trenches with somebody else in the company and making something together.
Yeah. And that is a common theme that shows up in this show as well, is that find an advocate of someone who has a dire problem that needs to be solved urgently. And it's why in storytelling, I'm a big fan of using empathy mapping with audiences to find out, number one, what's influencing the ideas around my listener. So who is whispering in their ear? What competitive threats are actively on their mind? Who are they taking advice from? Where do they seek counsel? What are they reading? And what analysts are important and interesting to them? What is their perception of what's happening in the marketplace? And really try to, if you can't step into their shoes, step next to them, at least try to stand next to where they're living and ask the two big questions of, I'm a New Yorker, right? The question I ask is, where is my listener bleeding from the neck? Like, where is there real pain happening for my listener in their life? And not the superficial pain, like, okay, we're not going to hit our Q2 numbers, but like, what's the underlying pain around that? And then even the personal consequence. What's the personal consequence of not hitting the goal that my listener is trying to hit? Will they potentially get fired? Will their project get canceled? Like, what are the real reputational consequences for my listener? And then on the gain side is, what does life look like in the next 2 years if I'm able to help with this problem? How does life get exponentially better if we can really solve this for them? And what is the short-term gain that this person needs now? Like, I want to be coming in with the tourniquet that stops the bleeding and establish some incremental small wins before we get to the giant vision, right? So I have to prove myself of being able to help them with these gains inch by inch, just like you talked about, to going out to lunch, really understanding what was happening. What are the pain points that are going on, and what would real progress look like? So if I don't understand those things and I'm just like, let's have a startup challenge, let's fix some things, let's put some new products in the market, like, we're not answering any of the big questions. So if any of my listeners want the empathy map that I use on even how to have these conversations, by all means, please just reach out to me at susan@innovationstorytellers.com. I will gladly send you the empathy map I use. It's a wonderful worksheet just to guide you through the conversation about how to find the pain. And then you can work on all the voodoo that Naftali does of planting ideas into people's mind once you have the data.
Yeah. Well, I want to speak about what you mentioned about the tourniquet. It's even worse in Asian companies. I also worked for Oppo OnePlus, which is a Chinese company, and it's not they're facing that they're bleeding from the neck. what they're facing is that their neck's going to get chopped off totally.
Woof. Wow.
Yeah, there's a fear factor. They don't want to move on something, especially if it's external, because if they don't succeed, they fear they're going to lose their jobs.
Yeah.
And most of the time, that's unfounded fear. You can ask their senior management, and when you get to know their senior management, what is R&D? R&D doesn't always succeed. They should they just have that in their culture, and you have to, and that's a little bit of what is the basis of their antagonism with working with open innovators.
Ah,
I,
interesting. So
if I
the
can't do
imposter
it
syndrome kind of fear that lives there.
right, if I can't do it myself, and I'm going to bring someone else, I want to control my own destiny. If I'm going to get my head chopped off, they're thinking, then I might as well be for my idea, not for somebody else's idea. That was why it was so imperative for me to bring it and make it their idea, make it their own, and then try to back away afterwards, because then I would just become a nuisance, and I didn't want to take charge after that. Then they told the story better than I could after it was in their brains.
Mm. So talk to us a little bit about so th that infotainment center that most of us have in our cars that we don't even know is an LG system, right? That you've had your fingers on. Um,
Right.
Talk to us a little bit about, beyond the startup grown up collaboration, where else do you think open innovation has real opportunity to succeed? We've seen certainly contests, not just with startups, but using individual freelancers to solve really big challenges, certainly. There have been internal going to other departments to figure out who can help solve our problems. Where do you think there's room for growth? Like as we look forward into the future, what else should large corporate innovators be thinking about in terms of how to revitalize their innovation projects? We're seeing a lot of large companies kind of downsize their innovation initiatives and pushing those ideas to the business unit leaders instead of a corporate innovation team. What should we be thinking about as that transition is taking place and how we can use open innovation more efficiently?
Yeah, I agree with you about the feeling that the open innovators feel like they're an endangered species right
Mhm,
now, especially here in Israel. A lot of talk about it, but the what the methods that I see, and I've done some research on this, I see that venture client kind of taking off. What bothers me is I don't see any open innovators in that, as they take the startup when it's more ready to go, and they just, all right, let's pilot the solution because it's reached a technology readiness level that's mature enough for us to pilot it quickly, and it's more like do it fast and quick and dirty and see if it works, and go to market. There's nobody in the middle with that. I see less of that in the middle, and I think that it's important for open innovators to be involved in the earlier stages, and that's working with academia. I've had a lot of working with academia because open innovation doesn't just cover working with startups. It's a whole. You work with startups, you can work with corporates, you can work with academia, you can work with other partners out there. I even worked in one position with a research company there was no product. They researched and solved your problem for you.
mhm.
So starting in the earlier phases, there's so much ground to cover with academia.
Can you give
The,
us an example of that? Because I feel like some large corporations feel daunted that, I'm going to be working with a bunch of scientists. They don't understand the market. They're developing really cool, interesting technology, but they're light years away from commercialization. I don't have the time to teach an academic how to manage my market needs. Can you speak to that a little bit?
yeah, well, you don't have to teach them. They're academia. They're looking to do research. So if you define this, you take a professor working in, and this is all earlier stage stuff. You take a professor who's working in, I'll give you an example. When I was in General Motors, we worked on hydrogen fuel cells. This is, they still haven't solved the problem, hydrogen fuel cells for cars, but they were working on it back in 2004 and five. So I brought a professor from one of the universities here, and he was able to solve certain problems. He was able to do certain things, and all these pieces, it's not one professor is going to give you a solution. You take this professor's work, and then you have another professor who's able to do something in hydrogen storage, and another professor who brings another portion of the picture working on batteries. And you put them all together and you get some kind of basis in your own organization. Now, all right, you gain knowledge. Now that you gain that knowledge, you can start making that your own. You can start developing from there. It's the advantage of working with that is they're never going to try and compete with you. They're never going to, you give them grants, you give them research funding as a per project. I did both in General Motors. I had access to both pots of money. And so, all right, solve this problem. Then you do solve another. And I had several researchers that, all right, they gave us different pieces, and I was able to find different researchers who solved different pieces of that puzzle. And they took that from there and started their own development. That was R&D. So I worked on the R, and they transferred it, rolled it over to the D. That's,
Interesting. Yeah.
yeah.
So you're kind of you're the Indiana Jones almost looking for all these different pieces of the puzzle, right? And bringing it together back to, we're just going to stay in movie metaphors for the rest of this conversation, apparently. Um, but, and then bringing it back to your own R&D team to say, okay, I have the research, you guys figure it out, now go make something.
Well, they took it to a level where they proved that it worked. Now they
Mm,
prove that it can work. Now you have to have the development team, which is basically they're in the same building. They're all part of the same team. They're working together. Now we take it ourselves, and we have all the results. We have all the samples. We have all the data. We have all we need. Then let's develop it further. They have all they need to do so. And what was good with General Motors, one of the challenges that a lot of open innovators don't work with academia is because of the terms and conditions that they throw upon you. What we did is we solved it in one fell swoop with all the universities in Israel, and we worked out a master agreement. This is the agreement. Any project we do with you under this will fall under this agreement. We don't want to negotiate this more than once.
nice. Nice.
Yeah,
And it's helpful. I mean, like the number of scientists per capita in Israel, I think is just overwhelming.
right.
But it's nice that you have a geography the size of New Jersey that allows you to create, much easier communication and a real concentration of that brain power. Before we finish this conversation, I want to turn to dual use technologies because it's an area that I'm really fascinated in. And I had the good fortune of keynoting the Bifrost Summit, which is a group of Scandinavian and Nordic innovators in all kinds of breakthrough technologies, from quantum computing to dual use technologies, all different kinds of cool semiconductor technologies. And it was a fascinating conference. But the piece that intrigued me the most was how quickly the interaction of dual use technologies is really taking off, both in the Nordics as the EU really redefines what it is to kind of be a high alert military power once again, and looking to the commercial sector and the defense sector to begin to play with each other a little bit more about how we share information. What do you see from this sector, Naftali, that's interesting on the innovation front? What should we as innovators be keeping our eyes open to when we're thinking about turning to the military for ideas or sharing our ideas with the military for more commercialization?
He gave me kind of a loaded question, which, because I have a very strong opinion on dual use technologies.
Please, we like strong opinions on the show.
Yeah, I call dual use technologies kind of no use technologies. And
Oh, interesting. No use technologies. Okay.
I, and I'll give you the reason why, because on the defense side, there's a small number of defense companies that can actually commercialize it. Here in Israel, it's just three: Israel Aerospace, Rafael, and Elbit Systems. In the US, you've got Lockheed and Boeing. In Europe, you have a few: Airbus Defense and Space, Rafael, I think, Leonardo. Doesn't matter. There are only a few. It's not like there's dozens of companies that can commercialize it. So you have to go to one of those. And the lead time for commercializing within defense is just so long. It's startups don't have the runway. I know it's become such a buzzword, but all right. So on the commercialization side, you have that challenge. But then once you get involved with defense technologies, you kind of get mucked up on the civilian side. Why? Because you've got ITAR and export controls. It limits the civilian side as well. I've come across companies with my last position in OI. Does it have a defense use or are you 100% just civilian? So even if they spun off the company into two companies, one that handles the defense side of it and one that handles just the civilian use, right? They didn't want to get involved because they were problems. They just felt it was problematic. That's why I say that it's very no use, if you ask me. I know it's become popular. It's become more popular in here in Israel because of the conflict with Iran and with the war in the last couple of years. And I know a lot of people don't. I know the people who think like me, and I know a lot of people who don't think like me. But I'd rather not be limited by something called dual use. I'd rather open it up to anything. Why not take, if you have a solution that works in fintech and it can be applicable to agriculture, why not? Why be limited? If I was limited, I wouldn't have been able to be successful in everything I did. Just you can't be that way.
Yeah. But what do you say, like so much cyber that's come out of Israel, right? Amazing cyber technologies started as defense and then became commercialized afterwards.
Right, and they basically started it. It was one of the things that it's hard to control, but one of the things I've always said, if it comes out of the 8200 unit, if they could find a way to take royalties on all the ideas that started there and then spun off into startups, we would pay so much less in taxes here in Israel, but that doesn't happen. So that's okay, and I understand the reasons why because it's hard to control. But fortunately, most of those technologies they were the brainchild of things that they worked on in 8200 unit. But when they spun them off and the founders founded the companies, most of them were for 100% civilian use, enterprise, cyber for everything. Not very little of it is really actually cyber for defense.
Interesting. Interesting. Well, I'm glad to get your perspective, but I now need to ask you the three hot seat questions that I ask everyone who comes on the show. So, what is the greatest innovation of all time, Naftali? In your perception, what is the greatest innovation of all time?
Hmm. Why wouldn't it be your hot seat questions? I like getting people to think, but if you want to ask my true answer, I think it's something that was given to us as a gift, and we just have to figure out the way to use it correctly. And I think it's the human mind. The human mind is the greatest innovation of all time. Just use it the right way, and you can make anything happen.
Fascinating. So, we're here to dispel the myth that there's just one genius innovator at the helm of any of the brilliant companies that we've seen. So, if you had the opportunity to join any innovation team in history, which team would you have joined?
We spoke about the defense, and I don't like fighting wars. I'd like to avoid wars. And one of the organizations, at least in Israel and in the U.S. too, is the spy agencies CIA and Mossad. They are there to prevent wars, and they do a lot of innovative things to prevent those wars. And that would be for me one of the coolest things to do. How do you track people that want to do harm to your nation? How do you know where they're going? How do you know what they're doing? How do you know what they're up to? So many innovations that came out of there. There's some crazy ideas I heard too, which if people actually if people actually put them out there, now the Mossad can't even use them. Um, I,
So,
I don't know if
James
you want me to
Bond.
tell you if you want me to tell you one of the ideas I heard was that the Mossad the Mossad worked their way into Iran as one of the medical organizations there, providing medical services to the Revolutionary Guard Corps, and as part of the colonoscopies, which they said you have to do on a regular basis, what was came around here, and I'm thinking it's rumor, but the idea was they implanted little chips up there. They were able to track to track the RAGC, and that's how they were able to find them. So
Oh my God. That okay. So I don't know if that's conspiracy theory or if that's real, but that
I
is
don't know, but all I do know is if that the Mossad can't use that right now because that was put out there by somebody. But
Even if it was a possibility, they can't even do it now.
so the question you asked is which organization? I think they do some of the coolest things, the spy agencies, and that would be the one I'd really want to work for as part of the innovation team.
So you want to be Q in the James Bond movies, is that it?
So to speak.
Okay. And what do you think is the innovation that the world needs now?
Well, you spoke about empathy mapping. I think understanding empathy, if you could have some kind of wearable or something that understands what other people are going through, not mind reading, because that's evading privacy. But if I know the person I'm speaking to um, has some kind of, he's sad at the moment or he's undergoing something, it would help conversations along much better, I think. We have the added advantage of we have to figure this out as we go along. So I'm not so sure, but I think it would help a lot if people could understand the empathy factor.
Yes. Or just talk to more women. They seem to have this intuitively. This could also be helpful.
Right. I'm about to put out an article in the next week about that. And I write on LinkedIn. I'm about to put out an article about women and the good things they do in the innovation ecosystem here in Israel. They're very important players.
Fantastic. I'd love to have more of them on the show. Please feel free to introduce me. Well,
For sure.
Dratman, this was a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us. If people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Everybody can find me on LinkedIn or feel free to send me an email. It's my first name, last name @gmail.com.
Beautiful. Naftali, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you very much.